Yam Shaiva Samupasade Shivaidi Brahmedi Vedantino Bauddha Buddhaidi Pramana Patava Karteri Nayaikaha Arham Nityada Jaina Shasanarataha Karmeti Mimamsakaha Soyam no Vidadhadu Vanchida Phalam Trailokyanatho Hari. He who is worshipped as Shiva by the devotees of Shiva, as Brahman by the Vedantins, as Buddha by the Buddhists, as Christ by Christians, as different manifestations of the one absolute reality by different followers of different faith systems. May that supreme reality, the Lord of the three worlds, fulfill our spiritual aspirations. Om peace, peace, peace. Today's topic is how to work without anxiety. Now, anxiety is one of the most common problems that we encounter in modern world. From the humblest man or woman holding a small job or students, right up to the most powerful administrators, executives, captains of industry, all of them face this problem. Internal conflicts, often developing into compulsive obsessive disorders, anxiety neurosis, painful apprehensions, uneasiness. All these are very common. Restlessness, concern, students' education, Medicare, job insecurity. That's also a very serious problem for anxiety. In fact, if anybody in modern world is totally free from anxiety, then there is something wrong with that person. That's what the psychologist will tell you. I have no problem at all. Which means you have a very serious problem. I mean, you don't even have the mental health to understand that you have a problem, which is a much worse problem, much greater challenge than the most complicated form of anxiety neurosis. So, total absence of anxiety itself is a serious pathological, psychological problem in the eyes of modern psychology and psychologists. And we consult psychiatrists, we take medicines, but this treatment doesn't solve the problem. It rather blunts our mind to become sensitive towards these problems. That's what really happens. Many of the serious psychological problems, especially different forms of schizophrenia, have no permanent cure. A psychologist or psychiatrist may not tell you openly. We postpone the problem, or our ability to feel the problem is reduced, medically reduced, which means the problem is not solved, the problem is postponed. Now, one serious problem with modern psychology is that it tries to solve the problems of mind at mental level. That's the most serious problem. Problems of the mind cannot be solved at mental level. At mental level, we can postpone, as I said earlier, our ability, our sensitivity to problem is blunted. These problems can be solved only if we can link the mind to something that is beyond mind. Mind should be linked to something that is beyond mind. In other words, permanent solutions can be found only in spiritual life. There is an interesting episode in one of the case studies involving the well-known author of Modern Man in Search of a Soul, Jung. He was not what you call a conventional believer in God. But then he found that certain problems, for example, compulsive obsessive disorder, a very perverted, idiotically misinterpreted concept of perfectionism. You go on doing certain things because you want to do it perfectly. Again, and this in its more ludicrous manifestation you find in washing mania. Of course, this is a very, very common serious problem. People who feel that their hands are dirty, some bacteria, going on washing hands, never leaving the tap, or checking the door whether it's locked properly or not. So Jung says in one of his case studies, he asked that person to pray to God. Well, if the door is not locked properly, don't worry about robbers breaking into your home because God will take care of you. Or maybe apply to the other case, a person who keeps washing his hands properly, going on washing his hands. Very often people in olden days, you find some old books, you find they could never leave the pond or river because they want to take bath again and again. It's a manifestation of washing mania, extended, perverted to a most ludicrous level. Well, suppose you ask the person, well, you pray to God, even if there is bacteria, He will take care of you. Now, this is a very concrete, simple example, may not be fully acceptable to modern professional psychiatrists because they had to depend upon the pharmaceutical lobby and their dictations. It's a different matter. Now, coming right to the problem of anxiety, as I said earlier, the problems of the mind can never be solved at mental level. Because mind, according to Vedanta, that's what I'm going to talk about, problems of anxiety in the light of Vedanta. Now, according to Vedanta, mind is a very relative phenomenon. Mind is not an absolute entity. Mind is as relative as this world. And nothing in this relative can be perfect. The relativity itself implies change, a degree of imperfection, something really which can never be actually perfect. Well, we may take proper care of this body, do exercise, eat the best food, dress in the most expensive clothes, but what is within our body? Nothing very spectacular, nothing very remarkable. Because anything that is in our body, when it comes out, we would like to, and if you touch it, we would have to wash your hands. That's a reality. To give just example, this point is stressed in one of Shankaracharya's stotras. In a very graphic way, Shankaracharya says, after all, what is this human body? It's not a very happy, not pleasant truth when we listen to it, because we do exercise to keep it perfect. We eat food to keep it healthy. We dress well to give it a good look. But then Shankaracharya says, it's nothing but just a skin bag in which there are many not so wonderful things accumulated, which you would rather not like to see outside of the skin bag. It doesn't mean that we must ignore body, not at all. No. Not that we should be indifferent, that we should be totally callous or negligent towards the needs or towards the requirements of this body system. In ancient Indian medical science, there is a dictum, Sharira Madhyam Khalu Dharma Sadhanam. This is the dictum which ancient Indian medical scientists, doctors, Ayurveda, you may have heard, naturopathy, they often repeat, Sharira Madhyam Khalu Dharma Sadhanam. This body is the prime instrument for you to practice dharma, to practice values of life, the supreme value of life, dharma and moksha. Going back to its origin, I shall just tell you the background of this dictum. There is a great deep message behind it. This verse comes in one of ancient Sanskrit dramas, Kumara Sambhavam. That is the story of a mythological, of a god, deity, written in Sanskrit by Kalidasa around 2nd century AD. Kumara Sambhavam. It has been translated into almost all important world languages. His first translation into German took place in 18th century. And great Indologists of Europe who studied, beginning with Schopenhauer, many others, Max Muller and others, they were all steeped in the works of this great Indian playwright and poet who lived in 2nd century AD, named Kalidasa. He is the author of some of the most sublime poetical works, Labhikyani Shagudalam, Malavigagnimitram. One of his most wonderful poetical works is Kumara Sambhavam. Now, there is a verse, Abhikriyartham Sulabham Samit Kusham Jalanyabhisnani Vidhikshamanite Abhisvashaktya Tapasi Pravartase Sharira Madhyam Khalu Dharma Sadhanam. This is the verse. Now, I was quoting that dictum from Ayurvedic physicians. This body, Sharira means body, is a prime instrument in your hands with which you have to travel, you have to undertake the journey of spiritual life. In that respect, in that aspect, this body is very important. But not by itself. So, I am coming down to the subject. Most of our problems of mind are related to one serious problem. We allow the body to dictate to the mind. We make the mind the servant, the slave of the body. We don't allow our own sense of being to go beyond the bodily level. In fact, that deeper message is implied in this famous Sanskrit verse. The background is this. A great spiritual seeker, the Divine Mother, she wanted to marry Lord Shiva, who was the god of renunciation. So, not from a worldly point of view, she wanted to realize Shiva, and her method of worship was she wanted to meditate, eating no food, giving up all luxuries, leaving her home, and she was the daughter of an emperor, a king, the king of the Himalayan region. He left the kingdom, the palace, the comforts, a young girl, and she went to Himalayas, and there she did penance, meditating day and night. Her goal, she wanted to get Shiva, she wanted to realize Shiva, the Lord, the Lord of renunciation, the Lord of knowledge. She wanted to get him as her husband. Now, Shiva was very anxious to know. He wanted to make sure that this lady was really serious. So he disguised himself as a mendicant and came to Uma, this lady, the young girl who was meditating, and wanted to tempt her away from her meditation. See, you have got a palace, your father is a king, and life in this cold Himalayan region is very pathetic. Do you get enough water for taking regular bath, for oblations? Do you get all the necessary materials for prayer, for worship, for meditation? So api kriyartham sulabham samit kusam jalani visnana vidhikshamanite api susaktya tapasi pravartase sarida madhyam khalu dharma sadhanam. And then he says, don't torture your body, because body is the instrument, the only instrument for the vehicle for you to undertake the spiritual journey. So on the one hand, he wants to tempt and test this woman to know whether she is fully serious about her spiritual aspirations. At the same time, he wanted to give a great truth, but it's not a ultimate spiritual truth. This body is very important. Mukhyam sadharam, that is Mallinatha's commentary, which I won't go into that. Now, the point is this. The statement is that body is very important. But that statement is made by God, who comes disguised to test his devotee, to know whether that devotee is actually undertaking this extreme penance sincerely, seriously or not. So the point is, we need this body, but body should not be the supreme goal of our life. Body is only an instrument, a means, a vehicle for us to undertake the spiritual journey. The goal is far beyond the body. So as I said earlier, the most serious problem in modern psychology is we are trying to solve the problems of the mind at mental level. And frequently, mind is being dictated upon by body. Body is dictating terms to the mind. Mind is under the tyranny of bodily requirements, bodily temptations. So the first step is we should go beyond this body. And secondly, once we go beyond this body, you find mind slowly takes control of itself. Then mind should be linked to a higher spiritual truth, that is Atman. For this, the first step is, that is, to go beyond the level of body consciousness is, we must be able to break the link that connects what we do with its immediate result. Whatever we do, we expect a result. Almost every manifestation of anxiety is related to our concern about the results of what we are doing or what is happening. There is no form of anxiety which is not related to this connecting thread, this link that connects our actions with our concern for their results. If we can break this link, then we can transcend the body level. And then we can reach the spiritual level. And once this link is broken, the mind gets attached, linked to a higher superconscious reality, which in Vedanta is called Atman. So, how to do this? That's the main question. For that, Vedanta gives one reason. We cannot be indifferent to the results of actions. That's true. Nobody can work in this world with total indifference about the results of actions. You go on working, you cannot be indifferent towards the kind of work you are doing or what results the work is going to produce. That won't help you even to physically survive in this competitive world. But then the question arises, does our abnormal concern or anxiety improve our performance? Does it give a guarantee that the results will be always up to the expectations? Anxiety doesn't improve the quality of work. And therefore, anxiety doesn't improve the quality of the end result either. Then what's the use of anxiety? Being anxious. It's like you bought a train which is running at 100 miles an hour, but you want to go 150 miles an hour. If you run up and down in the same train, you won't be traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Because the speed of the train is all that you can travel at, not higher than that. So unnecessary anxiety, apprehension about the results of what we are doing is no better than running in up and down in a train, trying to reach faster than the train. It never happens. Now, Vedanta gives one solution. It comes in the 12th chapter of the Gita, 10th verse, where the teacher of Gita gives one solution to this problem. Abhyasepi asamarthosi mattarma paramo bhava madartham abhikarmani kurvan siddhim avapsyasi. In the 11th verse, Atha edadabi ashaktosi kartum madhyogam asidaha sarva karma phalatyagam tadakkuru yadatmavan. In the 10th verse, one solution is given. Do work. You be busy in your office for 12 hours of the day. But then, whenever the mind gets anxious, when it shows signs of an abnormal concern, apprehension, painful concern for what would happen, whether my job is secure or not, then don't neglect your work, but counter this problem of painful apprehension with a counter thought. The thought is, well, I am doing God's work, so God will take care of me. It is not easy, but we have to pay a price for everything. If somebody says, I don't believe in God, I don't believe in anything, then you can have as much anxiety neurosis as possible, and high hypertension, diabetes, and all the associated things. We had to pay price for mental health. And the price we have to pay for mental health is we have to link the mind to something higher than the mind. You read any books on psychology. Most of the very serious problems of human mind have no solution, permanent solution. Please remember, this adjective is very important, permanent solution at the mental level. Because the solution is not exactly related to the physical mechanism of the body or the still indescribable, inexplicable mechanism called the mind. The problem is our attitude. Attitude can change the way mind reacts, the mind functions. So that's why Jung told a patient, you pray to God so that there will be no bacteria in your hands. A patient suffering from washing mania, got rid of his problem. Perhaps he was a very devout Catholic, maybe growing up somewhere. It happened perhaps mostly in France, not in Germany. He gives the example of a case study where a patient suffering from washing mania, which is a kind of anxiety disorder actually, is a compulsive, one form of what they used to call in olden times the COD, the compulsive obsessive disorder. So you pray to God. So you wash well, and then when the mind tells you, wash it again, because in compulsive obsessive problem, in many cases the patient knows that he is doing something extremely stupid and meaningless, useless. But he cannot get out of it. That's why it is compulsion. The patient knows that he is doing something totally irrational. If the patient did not know that he was doing something irrational, you can get him out of it by explaining to him. But the patient knows, but he cannot, for peace of mind, for avoiding conflicts, he has to keep it doing it. So there is no other problem. So you pray to God so that if there is bacteria or dirt or filth in your hands, there will be no problem for you. This applies to many other problems also. So there you find actually mind is linked to something that goes beyond mind. That's why he said, even if there is no God, we have to invent a God for the sake of psychological health. But we should not pray to God thinking we are inventing him, then there will be no effect. We cannot play with our own mind. That is, we cannot deceive our own mind. That it will be disastrous. So we should have a sincere faith in a supreme reality that goes beyond mind. And Vedanta gives a very, very simple, if a person can believe in it, very simple. If he cannot believe in it, then impossible. That is why matkarma paramo bhavajasi. Do your work to the best of your ability. And if you do your work to the best of your ability, the work will certainly produce its expected result. In fact, a person who has no anxiety problem, no concern for the results, will be able to focus his whole mental energy on what he or she is doing, and naturally the result will be much better than doing work with a lot of anxiety with him. So every action produces its result, no doubt about it. But the problem is we worry about the result, and our worrying or anxiety, being anxious about the result, doesn't qualitatively change the type of result that is going to come. Anxiety doesn't improve the quality of the result. Then why should we be anxious? So anxiety is a waste of time and energy. So Lord Krishna says, Matkarama paramo bhava. Do your work. But it is my work. But God is not going to take the paycheck. You don't have to worry about it. Lord Krishna is not going to claim the paycheck which is issued to your name. But mentally keep in your mind that you are doing this work for God's sake. So in both ways, it is a win-win situation for all of us. The next verse gives a further elaboration of this psychological technique. Atha etadabhyashaktosi kartum madhyokamasidha sarva karma phalatyagam tata kuriyatatmavan. This is the 11th verse of the 12th chapter of the Gita. Here, Krishna, the great psychologist, he comes down to the level of people who cannot even do their work, thinking that the work they are doing is God's work. So in such a case, that person can do whatever work he or she is doing, but mentally break the link that connects the work with its result. Because it is this link, this thread, that connects the work you are doing with its result, that becomes the cause of painful concern, irrational apprehension, anxiety and anxiety neurosis, all related problems. So for that he says, sarva karma phalatyaga. It's mentioned here, if you read a translation, you are likely to misunderstand. The literal meaning is giving up all the results of your work. That's what is mentioned. But in actual practice, it means giving up all concern about the result of your work. Giving up concern, anxiety about the result of the work doesn't bring down the quality of the result. It only reduces anxiety, neurosis, apprehension. It brings down to the BP, and it may prevent the aggravation of diabetic problems. That's a very, very interesting solution that you find in Vedanta. When this ideal of breaking the link that connects what we do with too much concern about the results of our actions, this ideal can be raised to a much higher level. When we reach such a level, what happens? Then we can keep doing work. We can live in this world without any concern, and at a higher level, Bhagavad Gita says, you must evolve in your own interpretation of your own personality. And this naturally happens. To begin with, we may believe we are this physical body. So long as we live at a physical level, there is no solution for anxiety. That is a fact. No permanent solution. Solution may be there, medication, counseling, prolonged treatment could reduce the intensity, can postpone the aggravation of much more serious complications, but cannot be permanently solved. That's why I said earlier, psychological problems can never be solved at psychological level. Psychological problems can be solved only at the superconscious or spiritual level. The psyche or mind should be linked to the spirit, the Atman. Spirit, he means Atman. Now, there is another important verse in the Gita. It comes in the 4th chapter, 18th verse. Karmani akarmaya pasyet, akarmani cha karmayaka, sa buddhiman manusheshu, sa yukta krishna karma krita. Now, here there is an interesting description of a person who is totally free from anxiety neurosis, who can work without anxiety. Such a person's concept of freedom and independence will be totally different. Normally, we interpret freedom as freedom for the senses. And freedom for the senses actually means tyranny of the senses. If we give freedom to the senses, then we are surrendering all our rights to our senses. And then that's the end of all freedom, all independence, because the tyranny of the senses is the real culprit, is the real cause of all forms of anxiety. Senses drag the mind in all directions, and mind is at the beck and call of the senses. Mind is the servant. The senses drag the mind in all directions. When we see an object, we want it. So the senses again drag the mind to as a visual object, and mind gets attached to it, and slowly the mind cannot shake itself free from its attachment, and it is enslaved, it is linked to the sensory object. And then people become anxious about it. All human aspirations cannot be fulfilled. There will be always some disappointment at some level, and that again creates anxiety and depression. So here there is a technique of sublimating our desires, sublimating the mind, sublimating our natural restlessness. Anxiety also can be sublimated. We become anxious. Instead of being anxious about a very petty small things, it really becomes anxiety neurosis. Be anxious about some higher spiritual value, that will be no anxiety. That anxiety was the special characteristic of the great spiritual personalities of the world. Sri Ramakrishna said he was anxious for realizing God. Of course, if we can liberate anxiety from the tyranny of the senses and sublimate anxiety and sublimate the natural restlessness of mind, then we can liberate ourselves from anxiety. Because a higher anxiety for a higher spiritual goal is the real solution for the problem of anxiety. Anxiety for sensory pleasures, sensory concerns is anxiety neurosis. Anxiety for higher spiritual goals it leads to spiritual liberation. It leads to calmness, tranquility of mind. Now here one verse is there in the 4th chapter, 18th verse. If you read it, we may not fully understand the meaning at first. Karmani agarmaya pasyet akarmani cha karmayeha sa buddhiman manusheshu sa yukta krishna karmakrit. This is the verse, 18th verse of the 4th chapter. It's a definition of who is a person without any anxiety. Sa buddhiman manusheshu sa yukta, that's a Krishna karma. 3 definitions are given. A person who can see action in inaction. Inaction in action. He is the supremely intelligent, wise. He is a yogi, the real practitioner of yoga philosophy, and he is the one who does everything. This is the literal translation. Now, how can we see action in inaction? Inaction and inaction in action. Vedanta believes that we are not just this physical body or the psychological mechanism. Physical body which is subjected to all kinds of experiences, painful and happy experiences. And mind also changes its moods according to the conditions of the body. Happiness, unhappiness, misery, so on. And again this anxiety problem, which are related to body consciousness and mind consciousness. Now, Vedanta says, this body, this mind, all these are only relative outer frames of our true nature. And our true nature is that we are Atman, we are consciousness, we are the supreme reality, we are the divine spirit that is present everywhere, that by its very nature is of the nature of absolute bliss, blissfulness. So anxiety is actually an alien thing for us. It is a foreign element. Our natural character is that we are the blissful Atman. Tranquility, peace, serenity, all these are our natural characteristics because we are the Atman, we are the supreme consciousness. All other problems are unnatural, strangers, foreigners to our personality. And this Atman, its presence enables us to do different things in this world. But it is omnipresent, it is all-pervading, it is immanent, it is present everywhere. All the great spiritual teachers were those who transcended this body consciousness, this mind consciousness, and reach this level of Atman consciousness. That's why they felt this inner contentment, inner peace, inner joy. In fact, contentment is one of the great characteristics of all great spiritual teachers and spiritual seekers. You find, even if you read the autobiographical writings of the mystics of medieval times like Philokalia, or if you read Brother Lawrence, if you read Saint Teresa of Avila, you find they were encountering problems. In many of the autobiographical writings, they are taking analysis of their own mind, but they had the feeling that they were moving towards a higher spiritual goal. They were interpreting all their experiences in the light of the higher spiritual journey. They were moving towards God. In that journey, in their evolution towards God consciousness, they had to face some problems, some difficulties. So they were not miserable. There was an element of inner contentment in all of them. It was this inner contentment that enabled them to face their challenges, problems, and in some cases even persecutions that happened during the medieval times. So, this inner contentment is one supreme characteristic of a spiritual seeker. Total freedom from anxiety. Now, in this verse, it says, when we interpret ourselves, when we define ourselves as this Atman, as the all-pervading, ever-blissful, the immanent reality, which is beyond body consciousness and mind consciousness, which is beyond the physical and psychological dimensions of our personality. When we interpret ourselves as this Atman, then we will be able to watch our own actions as we watch a drama that is going on the stage. When people suffer, when characters play different dramas, sometimes there will be tragedies, there will be comedies also. We may feel a little upset when something tragic happens. The pity and horror of Greek tragedies, you may have heard. All the Greek tragedies had one supreme goal: to purify, the purge of human mind of all its dirt and filth. That's one interpretation of the interpreters of the Greek tragedies. So, but the spectators do not identify themselves with those characters once they leave the theater. It's only a momentary impulse. So, if we can interpret ourselves as the Atman, and body, mind, all these as players in this life, then we won't be too much concerned about what is happening, because this relative world can never be perfect. And if you believe in devotional philosophy, God is the only perfect entity. If you believe in Vedanta, this Atman alone is the supremely perfect entity. All people have some higher ideal. In all traditional faith systems, they consider God as the perfect. So God is the only perfect thing in this world, entity in create. That we can conceive of. And world is always imperfect in the sense it is relative. And change is one essential characteristic of anything that is relative. That is the nature of relativity. So nothing in this world can be relative. We often become anxious because we expect perfection in something which is by its very nature imperfect. World can never be perfect. But we want the world to be perfect. So we become anxious. So this verse says, once we interpret ourselves as the Atman, then even when we are active 24 hours of the day, we can be in a state of total tranquility as if we are not active, because our senses mind, they are involved in action. They are only players on the stage. Atman is a witness. This idea was later on elaborated in many of the Yogacara systems of Buddhist tradition also. One supreme example of this I am going to present before you, then I will conclude. Most of you have heard of Mahatma Gandhi. Maybe he is the most well-known Indian teacher known in this country. Gandhiji, if you read Gandhi's life, he was, in a way, he was a very ordinary person. He was not a very brilliant student, not what you call a scholar or a philosopher. But he was all this and more than this in another respect. He was the one who was active almost 20 hours of his life, of the day he was active. 20 hours. He slept maybe less than 4 hours of the day. And Gandhi's complete volumes run into almost 90 volumes, including all his letters, his editorials in Young India, and all put together, huge volumes. And now, he was traveling all over India. He was leading Indian freedom movement. One of his acquaintances, he was a disciple, was perhaps an Englishman, C.F. Andrews, asked him a question, Gandhi, are you not feeling exhausted, fatigued? Why don't you go on a vacation? In an informal conversation, he asked Gandhi. Gandhi said, who is active? Now, Gandhi was one who was active 20 hours of his day. Who never thought of taking rest. And then when he passed away, he was not afraid. He chanted the name of God 3 times and passed away. All his life, in all his activities, he carried with him this idea, this conviction that he was doing the work of God. Now, every action was linked to something that goes beyond this relative world. His mind was linked to some divine, trans-psychological entity, which to him was Rama, his deity. He was a great devotee of Rama, so God. Now, these are just there are several examples. So he worked, he wrote, he spoke, he lectured, he led agitations. In spite of all this busy, active life, he worked for 20 hours of the day, looking upon each work as an offering to God, which in Sanskrit Vedanta called yajna. Yajna is an offering. Some of you who chant one well-known verse in the dining hall before eating food, Brahmaharpanam Brahmagavir Brahmagno Brahmanakudam Brahmaivate Nagantavyam Brahmakarma Samadhan is a very famous verse. It literally means this, whatever I do, whatever I offer, I, the one who is offering, making this offering, all these, every moment, all these are an offering to Supreme Reality. So whole life is interpreted as an offering to God. Of course, this is a much higher level, but to begin with, we can start by linking our mind to something that is beyond mind. And then we will be able to slowly transcend the psychological, the mental level. And once we advance even a little beyond the mental level, towards the spiritual level, then you find problems like anxiety and all other different manifestations of anxiety neurosis will slowly start fading. In some cases, it may require medication, but as I said earlier, psychological problems can never be permanently solved, remedied at psychological level. There should always be an avenue, a channel that connects the mind to the Atman, to the spiritual ideal. So thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Order. Namaste.